Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has just given a televised address in Ukraine. He says Russia resumed missile strikes at 4 a.m. Ukraine time on Friday, but its troops have been stopped from advancing in most directions. Julia Chapman joins us live now from the southern Russian city of Rostov-on-Don for more. Julia, thank you for joining us. What's the latest you're hearing in Russia regarding the military operation?
Well, the Ministry of Defense here maintains that it is only targeting military infrastructure in Ukraine. But of course, increasingly that is looking untrue. We understand that overnight there has been an intense offensive against the capital, Kiev, a bombing campaign carried out, one very large explosion in the early hours of this morning, which has been potentially attributed to a Ukrainian fighter jet being shot down, but the Ukrainian military hasn't yet confirmed that. There are also attacks happening in other parts of the country. In the south, we know that the city of Zaporizhia has been targeted. A border post there was attacked with a missile, and the guards standing there were killed. Some were also injured. And the attacks are going even further west, all the way as far as Lviv. There are now sirens being held there as well. So certainly this line from the Russian military that they are only targeting military infrastructure doesn't appear to be entirely true. We've been hearing from President Volodymyr Zelensky that civilians are among the casualties. So far, 137 people confirmed to have been killed. But we know from President Vladimir Putin speaking yesterday that he says these are necessary measures that needed to be taken to prevent a genocide in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine and to prevent any cultural elimination of Russian speakers there. He believes that these are necessary steps.
The broader strikes that you have mentioned are part of the reasons that we've seen tougher sanctions announced by many Western countries against Russia. How concerning is that for the Russian population?
Enormously concerning. Many people this morning are wondering how these measures taken against Russia are going to affect ordinary people. Undoubtedly, there is already being an impact felt. Many people struggling to get foreign currency. Of course, the ruble fell dramatically yesterday. The Russian stock market had to be suspended because stocks were falling so dramatically. But certainly there are huge concerns by Russian people as to what this means for them. We know that the Russian government is threatening counter-sanctions. We don't yet know what those will look like. But inevitably, what this will mean is that Russia becomes more and more isolated from the world economy. And if SWIFT is one of the options still on the table going forward, cutting Russia off from the international bank payment messaging system, that is going to make things very hard for the Russian economy more broadly, meaning that Russians will become poorer. And that is of huge concern. We did see yesterday in a few cities around Russia small protests as people tried to make their discontent known about this war. Of course, thousands of people were arrested, according to monitors. But certainly many people in Russia today are very concerned about how this affects them as well.
I'm glad you mentioned those protests, because I wanted to ask you if there is any expectation of further protests today.
There will certainly be voices trying to make themselves heard, but in Russia, protesting is a very fraught endeavor. It has effectively been criminalized on the basis of epidemiological restrictions, which, apart from limits on mass gatherings, are virtually non-existent in most parts of Russia. So undoubtedly, it will be very difficult for anybody to come out and protest. We did see these sporadic ones popping up in a few cities around Russia, particularly in Moscow and St. Petersburg, traditionally places that have seen the largest protests in Russia. But there is very little space in this country for critical voices. There is huge restrictions on free media, very few people able to hold the government to account, and we've already seen mass arrests. So those who are coming out onto the streets to protest these actions are taking very big risks themselves.
You mentioned media there, and that actually is a really interesting point. A lot of the reporting reporting we're hearing is of the attacks in Ukraine, the devastation that's been wrought on the civilian population, and how the Western countries are condemning this. But what kind of line is the media conveying to the public in Russia about why this conflict was necessary and how it's progressing?
They have been pursuing the line in state media that Ukraine was the aggressor, that these actions, as President Putin said yesterday, were necessary. They also have been focusing pretty much exclusively on the events ongoing currently in the Donbass, in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. There has been very little mention of the attacks that the Russian military is carrying out in western parts of Ukraine. So for the most part, Russian people do not know that cities as far west as Lviv are being bombed. So undoubtedly, there is very little information trickling through to the population. What they are being told is that Russian troops are moving in to Donetsk and Luhansk to protect the populations there, to support the separatist governments in their independence fight. And undoubtedly, they do not have the full picture of what is going on around the country. They are being told by their president, by government officials, and by state media that it is the West that has been stoking tensions in recent months, pumping Ukraine with weapons, creating this crisis that Russia was obligated to go in and solve militarily. It isn't clear to what extent that will be bought. If there are huge casualties on both sides, that is likely to be something that most Russians take serious issue with.
There is no doubt, though, that Russia really does outgun, for want of a better phrase, the Ukrainian military. Is there a sense in Russia that this is going to be a swift operation?
It isn't yet clear. Of course, the Ukrainian military is fighting back hard. Assessments from certain Western countries suggest that they are holding back the Russian military in many areas more successfully than perhaps was anticipated. But undoubtedly, at some point, they will be outmanned, outgunned. The firepower from the Russian side is much, much more significant. And we know that Western countries are very reluctant to offer too much military support to Ukraine for fear of sparking a wider conflict with Russia, one that could become nuclear. So undoubtedly, as President Volodymyr Zelensky was saying this morning in that address, Ukraine is alone. There will definitely be more casualties. It will be very difficult for the Ukrainian military to completely hold off the Russian forces. On the ground, they appear to be having some success, but undoubtedly the Air Force in Ukraine is much weaker than those in Russia.
Julia Chapman, thank you so much for that extensive update live from Rostov-on-Don.